Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 726 for the 4th of September, 2022. Richard Saunders coming to you from, let me have a look out the Skeptic Zone window, overcast, grey, windy, threatening to rain, Sydney, Australia. Coming up on this week's show, an interesting story. Those of you in Australia and possibly around the world may have caught up with the news that in the last week, Chris Dawson was found guilty of the murder of his wife, Lynette Dawson, around about 40 years ago. This has been an on and off case for many years, and amazingly, after 40 years, Chris Dawson was convicted of the murder. It's still a mystery as to the whereabouts of the body, and it is hoped now that the convicted murderer might divulge where the body is. However, he still maintains his innocence, so I don't think that's likely. What is even more unlikely is that the police will discover where the body is through the aid of a psychic. And that's the story today. A couple of years ago, when this case went to court in a sort of a pre-hearing, a committal hearing I think they call it, I was in court the day a psychic gave evidence, believe it or not. And this is just one of the most bizarre stories. However, I wrote a report about it at the time for the Skeptic magazine, and I will read that report for you today. That includes comments by Nicholas Cowdery, who used to be the Director of Public Prosecutions here in New South Wales. A psychic in court. Coming up at the top of the show. Following that, it's the Book of Tim, part 2 of an equally unlikely phenomena, unicorns. Part 2 of unicorns. And this, of course, is a reading from the pages of the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian Skeptics. Following that, it's a story about anti-vaxxers having to cough up hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees after a failed case against the government. Find out more later on in the show. Then we wander back to those Trove archives. This week, we're looking for references to the Zodiac. Are you an Aries? Are you a Pisces? I bet you, right now, listening to me in your car, driving along, I bet you're a Capricorn. Well, some of you probably are. Then to round off the show, another skeptical poem by our dear departed friend Jim Wilshire. And this poem is all about the Zodiac. It's called Zodiac Man. Now, before we get stuck into the show, a sad announcement, another one from me about a man I haven't seen for many, many, many years, but he was an early influence on me when I joined the skeptical organization, Bob Nixon from Victoria. He was an investigator, and I sort of was a bit jealous of him at the very beginning because I was just this new kid on the block. And Bob was running around investigating ghosts and water divining and monsters and stuff. I thought, that sounds like fun. I want to do that. I met him a couple of times over the years at conventions and whatnot. But sadly, earlier this year, we learnt that Bob has passed away. So condolences to his friends and his family. In his time with the skeptical organization, Bob certainly accomplished a lot of interesting things. In fact, if you go to the YouTube page of the Australian Skeptics, you'll see one of Bob's investigations. You know what? I will link directly to that in this week's show notes. So if you go to skepticzone.tv, scroll to the bottom of this week's show notes, you'll see a little section where you can see one of Bob's adventures with a mysterious cross of light that appeared in a bathroom window. Well, that's enough for me at the moment. It's time for me to run downstairs. What did I have last week? I think I had, what was it, toast and butter or honey or something like that? This week I think I'll run downstairs and have the last can. Tin can? It's aluminium. Of my favourite root beer, which a couple of weeks ago was delivered to me all the way from Atlanta, Georgia by Dr. Angie Matke. I had hoped to interview Dr. Angie. I did catch up with her, but we were having too much fun having a dinner and a catch-up for me to do an interview. But thank you, Dr. Angie, who is deeply involved with DragonCon at the moment. How I miss DragonCon. While I run downstairs, have that last root beer, I hope you enjoy The Skeptic Zone. Tuesday, the 30th of August 2022 saw the end, presumably the end, of a very long-running legal crime case here in Australia. That is the disappearance and presumed murder of Lynette Dawson way back in 1982. A couple of years ago, her former husband Chris Dawson was finally charged with her murder, and after delays owing to COVID and a lengthy trial, yesterday, the judge handed down his verdict after reading his reasoning via live stream for 5 hours before announcing his verdict. Now, the reason I bring this up is that I've been following this case from a certain angle, because years ago, many years ago, a so-called psychic detective, Debbie Malone, became involved in the case. And I outline more about that in a previous episode of The Skeptic Zone, which was broadcast in February of 2020. And if you care to look that up at skepticzone.tv, that's Skeptic Zone episode number 592 on the 16th of February 2020. Which, by the way, was also the very first episode in which our reporter Michelle Pickersma appeared to give her logical fallacy series. In that episode, I mentioned that I was actually in court when Debbie Malone was called as a witness in a pre-trial, a pre-hearing for the main trial. And I mentioned that I would be writing a report about it, so I think now is a good time as any to read you the report I wrote about that occasion. And this was published in the Skeptic magazine, the Journal from Australian Skeptics, Volume 40, Number 1, in March 2020. Together with my report are comments by Nicholas Cowdery, OAQC, a long-time friend of the Australian Skeptics and former New South Wales Director of Public Prosecutions. A Psychic in Court. Richard Saunders reports on the unusual situation of someone who claims to have psychic powers appearing in the witness box, and Nicholas Cowdery AO QC looks at some of the legal implications. It would be hard to imagine there are many in Australia who have not heard of the case of Lynette Dawson, who went missing from her Sydney Northern Beaches home in 1982. After decades of speculation, late in 2018, her husband Christopher Dawson was charged with her murder. The committal hearing of Christopher Dawson was held in Sydney at the Downing Centre Courts in February 2020. The hearing concluded with Dawson being committed to stand trial later this year for the murder of his wife. And as I've just mentioned, that was significantly delayed until this year because of COVID-19. I spent one morning in the public gallery, standing at the back of the court, to hear firsthand the questioning of a witness, one Debbie Malone, during the committal hearing. Malone is known to me as she was one of the contestants on the TV show The One, where I appeared as the skeptical judge. She is also possibly Australia's highest profile so-called psychic detective, and claims to have helped police in investigations going back many years. As a background, Malone was apparently interviewed by police in 2003 by way of a psychic session with members of Lynette Dawson's family present. This was recorded at the time, and part of this audio eventually ended up being broadcast on the Teacher's Pet podcast. I bumped into Debbie Malone on my way into the courtroom. We greeted each other and exchanged pleasantries. I wished her well in court and proceeded into the room. As Malone was being called upon as a witness, she needed to wait outside until summoned. This happened as soon as Magistrate Jacqueline Tradd opened proceedings. Malone was sworn in and took her place in the witness box. What follows comes from my handwritten notes and other reports in the media and covers some of the points from about an hour of questioning from the defence and prosecution. I offer this with no extra comment on my part, for it is possible that persons mentioned may take part in future court proceedings involving Christopher Dawson. And I might come back to that point after I finish reading this report. The counsel for the prosecution made it clear that Malone was, quote, a person who forms no part of the prosecution case, end quote. Counsel then asked Malone only a few questions, one of them being what Malone's profession was. Psychic medium and author was her reply. She also said she applied for no rewards in the case. Counsel confirmed with her that she took an interest in the Lynette Dawson disappearance after watching Australian Story on ABC TV in 2003, which covered the matter. Then counsel for the defence took up the questioning. Counsel asked Malone what was her expertise, to which she answered she can see people who are deceased. Further questioning along this line led Malone to say that she uses psychometry, the supposed ability of gaining information about a deceased person from the energy of personal objects. Counsel asked Malone if anyone had trained her in her profession, and Malone answered she had taken part in a, quote, learning circle in Gaimea, end quote. She also mentioned texts from the Psychical Research Society of England, presumably referring to the Society for Psychical Research. Questioning then focused on how and when Malone was put in touch with detectives involved with the Lynette Dawson disappearance case. Malone said it was via the producers at ABC TV, whom she contacted after viewing Australian Story. This also led to contact with the brother and sister of Lynette Dawson. Malone said Detective Damien Loon was open to her help and did not tell her he thought Lynette was dead or alive. However, Malone herself had formed the opinion that Lynette was dead following communications from the spirit world, and so viewed the situation as a murder investigation. Counsel followed this thread with more questions about how Malone gets her information. Quote, I have clairvoyance, so I can hear her speak to me, end quote, Malone told the court. Quote, when I tune into an item or a photograph, it's like watching television. I see snippets of her life, end quote. More information was gained via holding objects, a watch and a bracelet that belong to the deceased, and that at times she undergoes hypnosis to aid in her spirit communications. Malone told Detective Loon that she thought that Lynette was buried at the house and described to him details such as the position of the body and the ground. Now, I'll just stop here quickly to say, despite many excavations in that house over the years, the body of Lynette Dawson has simply not been found. Counsel asked Malone if she was a, quote, forensic psychic, end quote, to which she answered no. Then she was asked if she was, quote, fair dinkum, end quote. And that's an Australian slang term meaning, are you for real? Malone said Detective Loon was sceptical but had an open mind. Quote, you know there's a lot of skepticism about your apparent powers, end quote, said counsel. Of course there is, Malone replied. Attention then moved to Malone's visit to the house, or rather area near the house, in 2003 with Lynette's brother and sister. Detective Loon was not available at the time. She told the court she wanted to see if what was there matched her visions. She formed the view that Lynette was buried, quote, near an area close to the big rock at the back of the house in the vicinity of a fire trail, end quote. Malone told counsel that psychic information is never 100% certain, more like 75 to 80%, to which counsel replied that Malone herself said she was 100% certain Lynette's body was buried near the house, but a police search there in 2018 turned up nothing. Malone replied she was not part of that search. Counsel asked Malone if she thought it was fine to appear on the Studio 10 TV program to talk about the case. Malone replied that she wanted to set the record straight after the broadcast of parts of her police interview on a podcast, and that would have been The Teacher's Pet. She did not mention the podcast by name. She was disappointed the audio was used in such a way. Counsel for the defence then concluded his questions, and counsel for the prosecution indicated he had no more questions. And then it was over. I noticed that later that night, video of her leaving the Downing Centre was used on all 3 commercial TV news presentations. It was fascinating for me to be in the court to hear questions put to someone who claims to have psychic powers. I could anticipate some of her answers from many years of studying what psychics say and how they think. To let justice take its course, I will leave my report at that, apart from saying that I was a witness to a bit of paranormal history in Australia, no matter the outcome. And the second part of this report is by Nicholas Cowdery. The legal implications. When I was Director of Public Prosecutions for New South Wales, I retired in 2011, the Dawson case came to me for decision. On the evidence then available, I declined to prosecute. I do not now have any real recollection of the evidence that was presented for consideration, and I don't know if it included any statement from a, quote, psychic medium. I have not attended the present proceedings against Christopher Dawson, and I have not seen any record of those proceedings, apart from brief media reports and now Richard's piece. It is true that in the course of investigations, police do sometimes entertain the views of psychics and other magic people. I suppose they do so on the basis that, quote, anything is worth a try, end quote, and, quote, you never know, something might turn up, end quote. In the 1960s, psychics were crawling all over the disappearance of the Beaumont children in Adelaide, and there have been other high-profile matters involving them. Maybe the high profile is a clue to why they stick their heads up and why the police tolerate them. But we don't hear much about them in the thousands of ordinary cases they're contested. But what might be done in the course of an investigation can be quite different from what should be done in the conduct of a prosecution. A prosecutor is given a body of evidence to work with. Evidence is the record or recitation of facts from which inferences and findings may be made. I cannot, for the life of me, see how any account by a psychic of what she has allegedly psychically divined could be admissible evidence. Personal testimony must be of what the witness saw, heard, felt, did, had done to her, etc., and is relevant to the determination of issues in the case. It is relevant if it could rationally affect, directly or indirectly, the assessment of the probability of the existence of a fact in issue in the proceeding, as provided in the Evidence Act. There is no scope for including in that observations that are said to be psychically based and not based on our physical senses or objectively observable phenomena. Opinions are expressly excluded from evidence by law. The main exception to that is the expert opinion evidence regime. Any attempt to qualify a psychic as an expert and therefore able to express an opinion about facts in issue would be doomed to failure. I suppose for that reason is never attempted. Richard's description of events indicate that Miss Malone's appearance may have resulted from a procedure sometimes adopted by the prosecution in order to be fair to the defence. The prosecution did not rely on her evidence, so it seems that she was called as a witness being made available by the prosecution, hence the brief qualifying questions from the prosecutor, either at the express request of the defence or as part of the duty to present evidence that, although not relied upon, might be considered relevant in some way, especially considering the wide range of inadmissible and prejudicial material that was included in the Teacher's Pet podcast about this case. In summary, I cannot see any reason why the prosecution would call such a witness, and it did not include her as part of the case. Her evidence was inadmissible, in my view. The defence seems to have had her raised in the proceedings in order to dismiss her, going by Richard's description of her questioning. Or maybe, and I am speculating, her conduct in the case was relevant to explaining the words or actions of other witnesses and was useful for that reason, either substantively or by affecting their credit. The magistrate really should have rejected the evidence as inadmissible unless the defence demonstrated its relevance. It will be interesting to see if either party calls Ms. Malone in the Supreme Court trial. And I'll just say that never happened. Footnote: it has not always been possible to keep psychic influences out of criminal trials entirely. In 1994 in England, Harry and Nicola Fuller were shot dead in their home. Insurance broker Stephen Young was convicted of their murders in a 5-week jury trial in Brighton. A month later, the now defunct News of the World reported on its front page that 4 jurors, while confined overnight, had used a homemade Ouija board to communicate with the deceased and asked who had killed them. Obvious. The glass they were pushing around the board spelled out, "Stephen Young done it." When asked how, it spelled out "shot." As they were discussing what to do, the clever glass spelled out, "Vote guilty tomorrow." And yes, the retrial was ordered, at which after another 5-week trial Stephen Young was convicted again, presumably without the aid of a Ouija board. And that was again by Nicholas Cowdery. So there we are. And yet, people will still trumpet the fact that they are police psychics and the police call on them and they help solve crimes. I don't know what else we can do to put that myth to bed, because a hungry media will always jump on stories like that. You can read my original report in the pages of the Skeptic magazine. Go to skeptics.com.au, look for the magazine volume 40 number 1 from March 2020, and you'll find that report on page number 8.
Hey, Adrian.
Hi, Susan. Out for some shopping, eh?
Yep, I'm stocking up on this imitation maple syrup from Australia.
Imitation? Imitation? No. You need to buy the real thing from Canada.
But I saw the TV commercial and it said that noted pancake eating expert Richard Saunders says it's the best maple syrup money can buy, and 60% of people preferred it in a blind taste test. Everyone knows it's the best.
Oh, come on, Susan. You know better than that. That's the argument from authority.
It is?
Or is it the argument from popularity? It might be another logical fallacy. I'm not sure.
Really? If only we had a way of finding out.
Hello, everyone.
Oh my, it's the skeptical fairy godmother angel from the internet.
Yes, that's right. But how did you know who I am?
I listened to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Also, didn't you used to be the tooth fairy?
Oh, yes. I remember you. I'll never forget your left upper lateral incisor. Would you like it back?
No, it's okay. You keep it.
Hey, skeptical fairy godmother angel, what are you doing here in the supermarket?
I've come to tell you that you can find out about 40 different logical fallacies on YouTube in one handy location. Listen to each one to hear an explanation and examples of how they might be used.
Oh.
Just go to tinyurl.com facebook.com/logicalzone, and you'll find all the logical fallacies with Michelle Bickersma with handy time codes to get to the exact one you want.
Who is Michelle Bickersma?
Just a friend of mine.
tinyurl.com/logicalzone. Thank you, skeptical fairy godmother angel. I guess you'll disappear in a puff of smoke and thunder now, eh?
Not quite yet. I have a bit of shopping to do. Susan?
Yes?
Where do I find the Australian maple syrup?
What? No. Come with me, so-called skeptical fairy. This is real maple syrup from Canada. Made with real maple.
And now, a reading from the Book of Tim with Tim Mendham.
Hi, my name is Tim Mendham. I'm the Executive Officer of Australian Skeptics and also the editor of our magazine, The Skeptic. And today I will be continuing with an article that we began last issue on unicorns, an article called On the Horn of a Dilemma. Now, this is published in the March 2015 edition of the magazine, and which is volume 35, number 1, and it was originally published back in 1994. It's written by Anthony Wheeler from Queensland. And today we are continuing about unicorns and looking at the personal experience of travellers and elaboration on who they are or what they were. Now, the early descriptions of the Indian rhinoceros, some by eyewitnesses and others based on hearsay, bolstered belief in the unicorn. One of the best and most accurate is from Pliny the Elder, who says the Ausean Indians hunt an exceedingly wild beast called Monoceros, which has a stag's head, an elephant's feet, and a boar's tail. The rest of the body is like that of a horse. It makes a deep, lowing noise, and one black horn, 2 cubits long, projects from the middle of the forehead. This animal, they say, cannot be taken alive. And Marco Polo, the explorer of Asia, wrote in 1298, there are wild elephants in the country and numerous unicorns, which are very nearly as big. Marco's unicorn was actually the rhinoceros, an animal new to Europeans. The single-horned rhinoceros certainly fit this usual description of the unicorn as far as power goes, and the rhinoceros is the only animal with a central horn. Though, of course, the rhinoceros's horn is nowhere near as long as a metre or two, and the colour is wrong. In fact, the rhinoceros was a great disappointment for unicorn hunters, being greatly ugly and unattractive in its habits. Again from Marco Polo, they delight in living in mire and mud. It is a hideous beast to look at, and in no way like what we think and say in our countries, namely a beast that lets itself be taken in the lap of a virgin. Indeed, I assure you that it is quite the opposite of what we say it is. Similar stories from many travellers were compiled by Charles Gould into his Mythical Monsters from 1886. The number of accounts of unicorns suggests that maybe the unicorn is real, but the discrepancies between these accounts argue that they could not be based on the same common animal. Gould suggested that possibly the animals described were recently extinct, with the descriptions having been corrupted by poor memories and errors in their retelling. Another possibility offered was that the unicorns had been produced by crosses or hybrids between horses and deer, producing the variety. And thirdly, Gould acknowledged the contribution of, quote, embroidery of fancy designed to enrich and adorn an article esteemed rare and valuable. Now let's look at the New Testament authority in this. And the authority of the Christian Bible was enough to inspire belief in the unicorn as a real animal. This belief was strengthened in the Middle Ages by the European Christian tradition of the bestiaries, natural histories written to glorify God, to reveal his purpose in his created animals. The bestiaries portrayed the unicorn as small and very fleet, with a great shyness of man and fascination with the beauty and love of maidens. We also have the symbolic representation of Jesus Christ as the unicorn. Many times the scene of a unicorn, Jesus Christ, small, humble, and with a single horn, the unity of God, resting his head, the incarnation, in the lap of a virgin, Mary, and about to be killed, the passion, by a hunter, the Holy Ghost, was exploited. Alternatively, this pretty picture is an allegory for sex to some. Says Willie Lay, after all, what is white, dark at the base and tipped with red, and loses its power in the lap of a virgin? With such biblical and church authority supporting the personal experience of travellers' anecdotes, the unicorn was accepted as real throughout the Middle Ages. Edward Topsell's 16th century Histories of Beasts bases its argument for the existence of unicorns on a question from the Bible and the literal truth of the Bible. Quote, likewise, in many other places of Scripture, we will have to traduce, slander or misrepresent, God himself if there is no unicorn in the world. Also popular, from 3000 BCE to the present day, has been the motif of a lion and a unicorn fighting. This has been explained as representing the overthrow of an older matriarchal moon-worshipping society, the unicorn, by a patriarchal sun-worshipping society, the lion. Or alternatively, the succession of spring, with the vernal equinox in the zodiacal sign of Taurus, by summer, with the summer solstice in Leo. The variety of shapes of the unicorns in these illustrations, as though bulls, antelopes and goats had been the models for different artists, suggest the lack of real unicorns on which to base the artwork, or even as the basis for a consensus as to what animal a unicorn resembles most. British knights returning from the Crusades brought back tales of sightings of wild antelopes native to the Middle East. These antelopes have their paired horns set so close together that they appear as a single horn when seen from the side. Supported by the authority of the Bible, these crude sketches and memories of glimpse sightings became part of British heraldry. The unicorn features on the crest badges of the Scottish clans of Cunningham, Stewart of Appin, Ramsay and Oliphant, and Melville, and as a supporter for the arms of the city of Bristol. When Scotland was united with England and Wales in 1603, one of the two unicorns from the Scottish royal arms joined the English lion, displacing the Welsh dragon on the new British coat of arms, and is still there today, complete with collar and chain tethering the unicorn, symbolism for England's domination of Scotland. You can still see these arms, complete with lion and chained unicorn, on older government buildings in Australian cities. This parochial English nationalism persists in the nursery rhyme. The lion and the unicorn were fighting for the crown. The lion beat the unicorn all around the town. Now that's the end of part 2 of this article on unicorns. Part 3 will continue next episode of the Skeptic Zone, and we'll look at the supposed medical benefits of unicorn horns, etc., and the science testing of claims. And that will bring us to an end of this article that first appeared in 1994 in the Skeptic magazine and was reprinted in March 2015, which is volume 35, number 1. And you can get the whole issue and the whole article of that particular magazine on our website, www.skeptics.com.au, to download for free. And while you're there, you might as well subscribe as well. Then you won't have to wait.
The Australian Skeptics Annual National Convention, Skepticon 2022, will be held on December 3rd through 4th, the first weekend of December. But if you want to get cheaper tickets, then you need to be quick smart, as the lower early bird prices will be ending within hours. So get going. I got mine. Go to the ticket sales page at skepticon.org.au to choose full in-person, one-day in-person, or streaming options. Of course, I had to choose the streaming option. The event will be held at the National Library of Australia. The theme is Skepticism in a Changed World, and the lineup of speakers includes Claire Klingenberg, President of the European Council of Skeptical Organizations, the hosts of European Skeptics podcast, and live stream talks by Skeptics Guide to the Universe host, Dr. Stephen Novella, and Skeptoid host, Brian Dunning. There is also a wide variety of domestic speakers, including Major General Mike Ryan, retired, who will be speaking on science fiction and security professionals. Author David Dufty on Radio Girl, ACT Academy of Sport psychologist Christine Dunn on superstitions in sport, controversial author Clive Hamilton on being censored, and many more scientific and skeptical topics. For full details, visit skepticon.org.au.
Now here's a report that appeared on the website of news.com.au on Wednesday the 31st of August. Australian anti-vaxxers who sued state and federal governments forced to pay $214,023 in legal costs. And this is a story, or part of a story, I will read by Rowan Smith. Anti-vaxxers, including a 19-year-old who claimed a, quote, vaccine injury, end quote, have been slugged with an eye-watering legal bill after their case was tossed out. A group of Australian anti-vaxxers who tried to sue state and federal governments, citing fears over, quote, a new world order, end quote, have been slugged with $214,023 in legal costs after their case was thrown out of court. 9 applicants took the fight to the Federal Court of Australia in October last year, claiming that lockdowns and vaccine mandates were, quote, being implemented or undertaken in the context of a new world order, end quote, and, quote, constituted a breach of the Nuremberg Code, end quote. The New World Order references a conspiracy theory popularized by far-right conspiracist QAnon, which asserts that a secret totalitarian world government is emerging. In their statement of claim, the group demanded the then Prime Minister Scott Morrison, quote, together with each of the premiers and chief ministers of the states and territories of Australia, end quote, meet at the entrance to the embassy of the Republic of Poland in Canberra and deliver an apology. Poland? Court documents show the draft apology included language to the effect that the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, on behalf of himself and the premiers and chief ministers, acknowledged responsibility for putting Australia in danger of falling into a state of lawlessness and totalitarian rule. Justice Deborah Mortimer struck out the case against the Commonwealth, Victorian, New South Wales, Queensland, Northern Territory, Western Australia and Tasmanian governments in July, and an order on Monday awarded costs to each government. Quote, the allegations do not justify a trial, end quote, she said. The Commonwealth and Victorian governments receive $50,000 in costs. New South Wales receives $39,023, while Western Australia, Queensland and the Northern Territory governments receive $20,000 each, and Tasmania receives $15,000. The story goes on to talk about one of the people involved, a teenager, and then it says, New South Wales Health said it does not discuss individual cases, but urged people to use, quote, trusted and credible sources of information. Quote, we continue to encourage everyone to get vaccinated, end quote, a spokesperson said. Quote, the COVID vaccines available in Australia are safe and very effective at reducing the risk of serious illness and death. Please access COVID-19 health advice and information from the New South Wales Health and the Australian government, end quote. Of course, one of the things this story does remind us about is the dangers or the folly of believing conspiracy theories and getting swept away in conspiracy theories. They can have very, very bad results. But in this case, of course, for the people involved, it's a bad result of being slugged with an enormous legal bill. And doubtless the people involved in this, or many at least, would be firm believers in the conspiracy theories that they were told. I will link to that story where there is more information to read in this week's show notes.
G'day, this is Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, proud to be a skeptic, and you can find out more about me at drkarl.com and get lots of free stuff there as well.
Now it's time once again to go back to those pages at Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, the online resource from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia, full of digitised newspapers mostly, and of course magazines and many other publications going back many decades into centuries. And what an interesting thing it is to run to Trove, type in any word in the search box, and you never know what you're going to get. This week I thought I would type in the word Zodiac, which, hardly surprising, returns many results dealing with astrology. Yes, astrology and the zodiac signs, an evergreen of skepticism. In fact, even today, if you ask people around the world, I would expect if they know what their zodiac sign is or their star sign, they probably know. Although I think, if I'm not incorrect, in some parts of the world, people tend to consider their blood type when it comes to compatibility with other people or their characteristics. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, our first result comes from the Examiner from Tasmania, and this is published in 1938, on the 15th of June. Is astrology true? Can it be true, as astrologists claim, that human character and abilities are determined or even influenced by stars millions of miles away? Scientists are skeptical. Recently, an American psychologist checked up 5 of the leading professional astrologers on their readings as regard to one specific point. All these horoscope makers declared that people born between September 24 and October 23, that is under Libra, the scales, 7th zodiac sign, should have musical ability. If this is true, then it would be reasonable to expect to find a majority of musicians were born between these dates. The investigator ascertained the birth dates of 1,498 musicians. He discovered fewer were born under this sign than under any of the 12, except for Scorpio, which tied with Libra for last place. Well, there you go. Now we go to The Age, published on the 19th of August, 1939, and this is from Melbourne. The Signs of the Zodiac. An astrologer states his case, by G.M. Today, more than ever, since the days of ancient Egypt and Chaldea, or Chaldea, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, people are inquiring into the science of astrology, which by observation is seeking celestial causes for material effects and establishing records of planetary laws. Coleridge wrote, quote, "There is no doubt that astrology of some sort or other will be the last achievement of astronomy," end quote. The ancients wrote myths around the then-known planetary influences, but much has been lost, and new planets have been found, thus leaving modern astrologers much to discover. The factors used in astrology are the sun, moon, and the known planets, and their interrelationships or aspects, the signs of the zodiac, not constellations, and the 12 mundane houses. The ascendant or eastern horizon and the mid-heaven are the strongest mundane points. The fixed stars, when prominently placed, have also been found to hold influence. To obtain accurate results, the exact moment or within a few minutes of birth must be known, as well as the place and date. Unless two persons are born in the same place at the same time of the same parents, there can be no two persons alike. The skeptic derides the idea of planetary influence on human life, but in astrology, the sun is a great life giver. Okay then, that certainly beats the skeptics, doesn't it? Where would we be without the sun? If astronomers assert the planets are chunks of the sun, is it not logical to assume their influence also? It was only recently that the critics of the day were scoffing at the inventors of the telephone and radio and questioning their mentality. But now we know more of the laws of vibration. It is now realized that all matter is in a state of constant motion. The harder the material, the slower the vibration. Ice is water at a low rate of vibration. Steam is at a higher rate of vibration. Man also has his rate of vibration. The lower the vibration, the more brutal the type, and vice versa. I hope you're all taking notes. What has all this to do with the planets? The planets emit vibrations which have been found by observation to influence these material vibrations. A note played on a violin will bring response from another violin in the same room. So-called space does not prevent similar harmony or discord between the planets and ourselves, because we all know sound can travel through a vacuum. Traditionally, Jupiter has always been the greater benefic and is said to uplift those born under its influence. The great Duke of Wellington was born with Jupiter in the mid-heaven of the House of Honour. He never lost a battle and was never disgraced. George V was not the direct heir to the throne. He had Jupiter as a mid-heaven. George VI, as Duke of York, was in the same position. He also had Jupiter in the House of Honour. The late Tasmanian Premier, Mr. Ogilvy, had Jupiter in the mid-heaven. This is not the sole factor, but it greatly assists. Saturn was also said to swallow his children. Placed prominently in the mid-heaven, this planet has been found to raise people high above their birth station, but with ultimate downfall or disgrace. Oh dear. Often literally giving falls from great heights. Napoleon had Saturn in his mid-heaven. Hitler also significantly has it. By similar methods of observation, it has been found that the ancients were not so foolish in their allotting of influences to the planets. Mars is truly the planet of war, Venus of love, and so on. The later planets. But what of the recently discovered planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto? Uranus was discovered in 1781, Neptune in 1846, and Pluto in 1930. The uninitiated wonder how these planets were allotted their influence. But how many engineers were there before 1781? How many electricians, radio experts, airmen? These are the vocations that Uranus has been found to govern. It is the planet of suddenness, unexpectedness, and speed, and has been called, quote, the awakener, end quote. Since its discovery, civilization has speeded up. It rotates on its axis in the opposite direction to the other planets, and people born with Uranus strong are strange, orthodox, and iconoclastic. They go against the usual run of things. I hope you are still all taking notes out there. And Neptune, mysterious distant planet. How many spiritualists were there before 1846? The Rochester knockings, which started the movement, occurred in 1884. Astrologers have found that mediums, psychics, and those interested in ghosts and other world matters have Neptune prominently placed in their nativity. Neptune gives the spiritualist and idealist on one hand, and on the other, the drug addict, the drunkard, and the swindler. Disclaimer, the Skeptic Zone podcast makes no assertions about any listener born under any particular sign. We read on. Pluto, named after the ancient god of the underworld, is found to be upholding his ancient reputation. Since his discovery in 1930, man has been turning his attention underground for protection from air raids. Recently, America, Britain and France each suffered a submarine disaster. At the time, Mars was in opposition to Pluto. Pluto was also notorious for kidnapping, and, strangely enough, following his discovery, the kidnapping vogue appeared. Colonel Lindbergh's son had Pluto in the midheaven. And I think that, of course, refers to the sad case of Charles Lindbergh's son being kidnapped, and I think he was killed, if memory serves. And so, by observation, astrologers study the effects of celestial causes. They do not teach fatalism, as is generally supposed. The planets give the stimulus for action, but they do not compel us to act. If anything is commenced under adverse planetary conditions, it will have a much severer passage and far greater chance of failure than if commenced under favourable planetary stimulus. I must remember that. Astrologers claim it takes more than ordinary people to, quote, rule their stars, end quote. They cannot, with certainty, predict events and their effects, but with their knowledge of influences at any given year, of life and of human nature in the average, they can say fairly correctly what conditions will beset the life and their probable effects. Even with these limits, the astrologer asserts, this advice must be of value to balanced and intelligent people who would be prepared to meet favourable and other conditions. All people are subject to climactic conditions, whether living in Melbourne or at the tropics. The farmer cannot choose his weather, but his reasoning powers enable him to increase his crop by inventions and discoveries. The weather can usually be estimated in advance. Seasonable times for certain activities can be calculated, enabling him to work to advantage. Astrologers claim to be able, with a fair amount of accuracy, to measure prevailing conditions and to sum up in a general sense the person they apply to, but the most they can say is the probability of certain results. Yet, this is better than being able to say with certainty, otherwise it would mean that all things are inevitable, and reason and intelligence have no choice. It may be understood, therefore, that astrology is what its name implies, the logic of the stars. Cheap mass production horoscopes are not genuine astrology. So there. These are merely based on the sun's position in the Zodiac. They are about 1/12 correct, and there are many mixed influences to decipher, and much fine judgment is necessary to arrive at correct conclusions. And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars. Luke chapter 21, verse 25. Now that's interesting to me because that whole story, including a diagram, which is a circle with the earth in the middle and sort of divided up, what to say here, 9th house science and religion, etc., 10th house honor employment, 11th house friends, Western horizon. Yeah, there's the diagram there. But the point is, this was published in The Age newspaper in Melbourne, which is normally a respected newspaper, but this was published in 1939, just before World War II. So there we go, a strange collection of items and reports over the decades revolving around the word Zodiac. And no matter if you're a Pisces, a Sagittarius, a Scorpio, an Aries or a Leo, you too Might find all sorts of interesting things when you go to Trove. Look around, because you never know. You never know what star signs you might find.
Zodiac Man. He was a complicated puzzle, an enigma of the sign, a multitude of types placed together by design, with all the characteristics of the symbols of our birth, in a melting pot of humankind, a true man of earth. He walked like a Pisces and talked like a Sag, and wore the Taurian demeanour like a veritable badge. His style was affected by the influence of the moon, but it's likely his Libra came into cusp too soon. Virgo laid its hand upon this man of many parts, and his Gemini certainly stops where his Capricorn starts, which gives you a perception that he may have the Aries, although his Cancer side luckily is away with the fairies. Aquarius has washed him where Scorpio stung its stings, and Leo roars loudly, you can hear it when he sings. This man of many colours, with their influences clear, from a birth which broke records when it went on for a year. Some claim that he is layered by the impressions of the stars, and if you study him very closely, you can just detect the scars where the doctors separated him from his ego early on. That's why he's now so precious, although his aura's nearly gone.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Next week on the show, I hope to bring you, in the Trove section, reports about telepathy. You don't hear that term much anymore. It's like ESP, they're sort of antiquated terms. Telepathy, And part 3, and the final part of Tim Mendham's series about the unicorn. Another big thank you, as I always do, to the people who support the Skeptic Zone by PayPal or Patreon. It means that for, coming up to 14 years of the show, I've never had to run commercial advertising. The advertising you hear in the show for other podcasts or skeptical groups or whatnot is all done for free. I firmly believe that they're worthy of your attention. So those YouTube channels, those people, those podcasts, I don't get any kickback, no favors, no money, nothing from those people. I just think it's the right thing to do. So your contributions means I can keep promoting things that I think are worthy instead of face cream or or some sort of internet device or running shoes or VPNs or whatever. And now I don't knock podcasts that do it. I mean, we all have to make an income. I mean, these things don't just magically happen for free. There are bills to pay. Believe me, there are bills to pay. There's a lot of work goes into making podcasts. The Skeptic Zone is no exception. But thanks to the generosity of people who do contribute, even if it's a couple of dollars a week, it means that so far I can avoid running ads for peanut butter or something. Actually, I might run an ad for peanut butter. I quite like peanut butter. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter @SkepticZone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. Hello to those people who listen after the show. I haven't done this for a while. Let me see this one. Let's play the dice game. This is where you use your psychic, magical, mystical guessing powers and see if you can predict the fall of the dice. Die. 10-sided die. D10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. So you're predicting the past. Because, of course, obviously you're listening to a recording and this has happened a day or two ago, yesterday, something, whatever. It's happened. However, you have to predict what will come through your earphones next. What number? It's a bit complicated, wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey, you know. Okay, it's a D10, as I said. First roll, so guess, predict, use your psychic powers, your lucky luck. Here we go. The first number coming up is 3. So I write on my Skeptic Zone notepad with my Skeptic Zone pencil and drop the dice on the floor. Next number coming up. What's that? That is a 9. Okay, here it comes. Oh, it's a 9. 399. 399. And the lucky last number. Lucky. Susan Gerbeck, are you listening? Here it comes. Yes, Susan, it's a 5.